Okay, great. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another SIAH, Southampton Institute for Arts and Humanities Public Life Conversation. Today, we're very happy to have Peter Gallison join us. And Peter's in Cambridge, Mass. And I'm going to, the structure of this would be, I'm going to provide a brief introduction to Peter, set him up for everybody who's here. They may know aspects of your career, Peter, but not the thing in the round. And I think it is your career in the round that is so intriguing to me and to all of us who will be joining today. And then we'll have a bit of a conversation around the topics that you and I discussed previously. And then for the last 15 minutes or so we'll go for about 45 minutes. For the last 15 minutes or so, we'll have Q&A. And the Q&A for those who are in the room and participating virtually is going to be solely taken from the chat because you will be muted the entire time. So if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have thoughts along the ways, thoughts, diatribes, ventings of the spleen, anything that you might want to put forward, please just put them in the chat and we'll try to plow through them as best we can. So on to the introduction. Peter Gallison is the Pellegrino University Professor of the History of Science and of Physics at Harvard University. Among the numerous awards and honors he has been accorded are a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, the 1998 Pfizer Award for his book Image and Logic as the best book that year in the history of science, the Max Planck and Humboldt Stiftung Prize, and in 2018, the Abraham Pais Award in the history of physics. His books include How Experiments End, Image and Logic, which I already mentioned, Einstein's Clocks, Poincaré's Maps, Objectivity with Lorraine Daston, Big Science, The Growth of Large-Scale Research, which is an excellent book, and Picturing Science Producing Art with art theorist and historian Carolyn A. Jones. Professor Gallison is also a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, with such works as Ultimate Weapon, The H-Bomb Dilemma, which is about, well, as it says on the tin, the dilemma, the various dilemmas around whether or not to develop the H-bomb. Containment, which is about the need to guard radioactive materials for 10,000 years and how to indicate this to an unknowable future. And Black Holes, The Edge of All We Know, about trying to solve the black hole paradox Hawking put forward in the 70s, and the Event Horizon Telescope Imaging Project, which is a film and a project in general that we will discuss today. Also, he's collaborated with South African artist William Kentridge on a multi-screen installation entitled The Refusal of Time, and an associated chamber opera called Refuse the Hour. He co-directs the Critical Media Practice and the Film Studies Center, both at Harvard. He is a co-founder of the Black Hole Initiative, which we will be talking about, an interdisciplinary center for the study of these most extreme objects that we encounter in the universe. Two preoccupations seem to factor in all of his work, from what I can tell. The materiality and concrete nature of science and scientific knowledge, and its collaborative dimension, and the importance of images and imaging technologies and practices, a nexus which speaks to a significant slice of work conducted in our own faculty. So it is my great honor to welcome Peter and to say thank you for your time, because time will be an important part of what we discuss today. So thanks, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I thought we would start with, as we had discussed, maybe with the collaboration that you did with William Kentridge on The Refusal of Time. The title includes an ambiguity, really, of rhetorical subject and agency in the phrase, the refusal of time, due to the preposition, in that it is time that refuses us, as much as us wishing not to yield to the pressures of time and mortality and refuse time's dominion over us. As a result, the piece includes a media technology focus in many ways around the turn of the 20th century, especially early cinema and its ability to manipulate time and space, as well as the moments just before, during, and after Einstein's reconstitution of time around 1905. A moment that the exhibition links to in this instance is also related very much to colonization in South Africa and elsewhere, and the use of various technologies of science as universal and therefore agents of control and power. And I know that your book on Einstein and Poincaré was an important catalyst for Kentridge's initial thoughts for this project. Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of this project, how it emerged, your participation in it, the dialogues, et cetera? Anything you might want to discuss in relation to that. Hope I didn't bang on too long. Sorry about that.
Not at all. So a mutual friend introduced us, William Kentridge and me. It must have been around 2010 or so. And he had an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art that was across different departments there in film and in sculpture and in painting. And it was I had seen that, and this friend had passed to him the book that I wrote, Einstein's Clocks, Poincaré's Maps, that you mentioned a moment ago. And we were both interested in the other's work. We were both interested in this moment around 1900 of a kind of materialized modernism, a modernism that was written into switchboards and wires. Things weren't yet buried in chips and black boxes and epoxy seals. It was sort of the modernity of telegraph lines being dragged through the streets and under the cities and across under the oceans. It was a world that you could see a kind of future of unfolding, but it hadn't completely unfolded yet. And so we started meeting. We met once a week for many months in New York, and started talking about moments or scenes that we were interested in. I remember I had written in Einstein's Clocks, Poincaré's Maps about the dragging of the first ocean cables across. Right. And one of the first things that they did was they sent a signal that coordinated the clocks in North America and in England. Or another scene was from the Secret Agent from Joseph Conrad's most famous novels, where the agent of destruction comes to blow up the prime meridian, the observatory where the center of time was at Greenwich, just outside London. And so we were interested in these moments of time as a kind of focus and target and exemplification of modernity. And we started talking about that. There was another thing that amused us both, I had written in the book, was that in Paris and Vienna, they would pump time in compressed air tubes under the city. And right. So the idea of pumping time in a pipe just seemed so hilarious to both of us. This materialization of something that is the quintessentially unmaterial, abstract entity, time. So we started thinking about that and eventually settled on after many months, settled on a structure that would begin with Newton's imposition of absolute time, right. The idea that there was a time independent of clocks and equably flowing, as he said, the period when Einstein fragments time into the time of each observer as they move in the world. You have your own private time, so to speak. If your twin goes out into space and comes back, he or she ends up younger than the stay-at-home member of the pair. And then the eventual sort of remarkable things that happen to time around black holes, which in a sense are the destruction of time and the switching of time and space and the possible reversal of time. So it was those three stages of absolute, relative, and destruction of time that fascinated us. And we began to think about this as a kind of combination of multi-screen installation and chamber opera.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful and evocative and also funny um, installation. And at the center of it is that machine, which is kind of a bellows, or almost like the concertina as well, and it's pumping away there. It's like the lungs expanding, and which is meant to be sort of a machinic representation as well of the corporeal talking humans as talking clocks, right? That Kentridge talks about from now and again, and that links to. So it's the beating heart, but it's also the my cat's attacking me. Artificial lungs powering the whole, but it plays into time in music, art, speech, rhythm, signals, media technology such as telegraphy, radio, cinema, including animation, photography, recorded and broadcast music, and metronomes. And it is, as you mentioned, always simultaneously material and immaterial, and literal and metaphorical. And I was really interested in how these mechanical manifestations of time, which I've always been incredibly interested in, um, embody and undermine time and control and power. Does that speak to anything that you were thinking about in relation to?
Very much. The reason that the terrorist of Conrad wants to blow up the observatory and the center of, which was the center of time, the zero of longitude, the measure of space and time in the world, was because it was seen as a kind of exemplar of empire. It was the imposition of a universal order, and the mapping of the world had a quite practical aspect, was a practical aspect of colonial domination. So I think there is that sense, and that's something that in different ways Kentridge has been long concerned with, long before collaboration with me, and that I was interested long before him. The subtitle of the book is Empires of Time. It was about this attempt to control the world by distributing time, therefore determining longitude, by who sets the map of the world, so to speak, and the map of time. So that was the idea of power and time were very definitely part of our thought. In the piece, this was Kentridge's idea. He transposed London to Dakar, and so that and the terrorists morph into also issues of colonialism and decolonialization and much else. So yes, those were very much part of it, and as was the other idea that you mentioned, that these bellows, where they were the bellows pumping time underneath the streets of Paris, they were also our lungs, our human fragility, our human subjecthood to time, that we are living, breathing clocks. When Galileo first did some of his observations, he used his own heartbeat as a clock.
Yeah, and there is a way in which, black holes figure in it literally and figuratively in the refusal of time. You have black hole as time as a black hole barker, right? Which is a human figure with an acoustic megaphone on top of it, and it indicates not only black holes as the event horizon, but as our own event horizon, right?
Yes.
That is the part of the thing as a species that is aware of its own mortality. So that black hole reminds us of the black hole in the ground, right? As Beckett said, we give birth astride a grave, and the light gleams for an instant and then it's gone. And so black holes and time in general, anytime there is an articulation of time in art or in literature, it is also a memento mori. And that seems to be driving through both this project and the Black Hole Initiative.
Yes. Sometimes people will ask me, do physicists think about the metaphorical or elusive function of black holes? And absolutely they do. I mean, the idea that the black hole has a horizon, a one-way membrane in which you can pass in but not out.
Ah,
You can't signal, you can throw things into a black hole, you can signal into a black hole with your flashlight, but once you cross that boundary, you're not coming back. That's so redolent of death and so obviously redolent of death that it comes up all the time.
yeah.
And I think that the interest that, I mean, physicists are specialists, but we're also human. And we
Uh,
participate in a broader culture that, in which black holes carry all these other elusive meanings, and they make it different from other objects. I mean, we don't have neutron stars. I don't mean to demean neutron stars. Some of my favorite objects are neutron stars, but there's no neutron star institute, right? It's
no.
not something that gathers around it philosophers, mathematicians, historians, astronomers, fundamental physicists, fundamental theorists, and so on. There's something about black holes that in all of these fields, whether it's mathematics or theoretical physics or philosophy, there's something about them that represent generative objects that precipitate thought and the combination of thought from these different realms.
Yeah, I mean, the gravitational pull is of course physical, but it's also imaginative. It's noetic, and it speaks to a number of domains. I was also interested about that period in which, right around the turn of the century, where theoretical physics and time is moving in a particular direction, but also due to the concatenation of a range of different imaging technologies, became an apparatus that we think of as science, and to record and project, but then also to run things backward. And as soon as you are able to run something backward, it allows for a sense of time not having that arrow, not having a trajectory, but something that you can use either to repair an event or just to have things occur in the world. It changes our sense of corporeal apperception, right, which is Vertov and the man with the camera, being able to move all over the place in a rapid succession that time and space would not allow us to do. And similarly, a vase of flowers drops to the ground, and you can immediately reconstitute it by running it backwards, which is what Méliès was playing with. And this particular installation plays with that a lot, with repetition,
A lot.
and reversal. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, in physics, the more than metaphor of playing the film backwards or slowing the film down. I mean, film is par excellence the medium of time. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a time-based medium in every sense, and we use it to think about speeding things up, so we can watch a flower bloom, or
Yeah.
slowing things down so that we can watch the movement of the wings of a bumblebee, or film is, or run it backwards, time reversal or spatial reversal through mirrors. These everyday objects of film and mirrors and light are deeply associated with these very fundamental questions of the nature of space and time.
Yeah, and they link up very, I mean, of course, the connection to chronophotography and motion studies and all of that with Muybridge and Jules Etienne Maré, was simultaneously scientific and artistic, which leads to this idea of the inextricable interconnection of scientific imaging and artistic or what we would think of as aesthetic imaging. And so that might be a way for us to begin to think about shifting over to your black hole initiative and the image created with the Event Horizon telescope. So do you want to talk a little bit about the film or the image or the projects? I have different elements I'd like to pick up
Sure.
with you, but
let me give you a brief overview. We
yeah, great.
there were originally 6 of us from a variety of fields: mathematics, physics, astronomy, observational and theoretical astronomy, and philosophy, history. And we started this initiative, this institute, we started working on it in 2015, and it opened in 2016. We had a big festive ceremony. Stephen Hawking came over and gave a big public lecture around the founding of it. And the idea was that there were things we could learn about black holes in combination that we wouldn't see separately. Mathematics and physics, physics and philosophy. We have postdoctoral students who've come in cross between philosophy and mathematics. So many different combinations, and we began. The doors opened in April of 2016, and there were two big projects at that time. One of them was led by Andy Strominger, a colleague in physics here, and it was work that he was doing jointly with Hawking, Malcolm Perry in Cambridge, the UK Cambridge, and Sasha Heiko, a then young student who had joined them. And the other was that their goal was to see if they could make some progress towards resolving this great paradox that Hawking had launched on the world in the early 1970s. And that paradox was that it seems as if black holes destroy all information about how they were formed, that all you can say is how big are they, how massive they are, and how much they're spinning. And if that was true, then information about the world, the universe, was constantly being lost. But all of physics, Newtonian physics, Einsteinian physics, even quantum physics, depends on information not being lost.
Right.
And so it seemed like it was like taking a sledgehammer to the delicate clock of prediction, so to speak, that physics had been aspiring to achieve certainly since the time of Newton and maybe earlier. So that was one big project. And the other was this attempt to do something that seemed impossible, to make the most reluctantly visible object in the world, a black hole, visible. I mean, black holes reflect no light, they emit no light. How are you going to make a picture of one? But it turns out that there's, hot gases and other things circulating around them. There's stars that are getting ripped apart by the tidal forces of gravity near black holes. And so that luminous matter right outside the horizon of the black hole can be seen. But to do it, you needed a telescope the size of the Earth. Right. And so another one of the colleagues, Shep Doleman, had been leading, and it was formalized around 2015 to try to combine existing huge radio telescopes into one synthetic big Earth-sized telescope. And that culminated in 2019, in April of 2019, in the first image of a black hole. So those two projects, and I got very involved on the physics imaging side of the imaging of the black hole, the Event Horizon Telescope. But I decided on a bit of a gamble to start filming these two projects from their inception around 2015 to whenever they would end. And I say gamble because they both could have collapsed. The Event Horizon Telescope could have produced a blurry disk of nothing, and it could have been impossible to calculate how much information could be stored on the horizon of a black hole, which was the Hawking, Strominger, Heiko, and Perry project. So I started filming that, and sort of filming the making of an image was already interesting to me, and what it would be like to to get inside the process of the science without knowing the end, not the triumph of plastics or the race to DNA, where we know the outcome. We know the outcome. The outcome is not known, and so the uncertainty is part of that account. So that was, we've since then we've expanded, and we've brought in three new principal investigators there. Priya Natarajan, who's an astrophysicist, she's at Yale. Annetta Engelhardt, who's at MIT, and just recently Michael Johnson, and with whom I'm working very closely on a space mission to extend this network. But that's we can talk about that later if you're interested.
Yeah, I would be. I mean, it opens up again a range of things I'm really kind of interested in talking to you about. One of them, though, is the those two teams, and I liked within the film, you're tracking the two teams working, one, more theoretical, well, actually proper theoretical physics, and the other, for lack of a better term, a little bit more applied, trying to make an image out of it, and that massive project. But they're two very collaborative teams working on solving separate but deeply interrelated problems of the black hole paradox and the production of that image. And I liked the structural quotidian element of collaboration and labor that you depict here in the process of knowledge production, as opposed to the eureka moment and other sorts of narratives that might exist, not only about science, but just about the production of knowledge in general. And do you see the documentary as being about that human labor?
Very much. I mean, a lot of my work, and not just mine, I'd say that, if I were to identify what
Yeah.
characterizes the understanding of the history of science and a certain part of philosophy of science over the last 30, 40 years, it's a focus on the local material work of making science, rather than is this theory confirmed? What is the nature of scientific progress in general? Is there a demarcation between truth and falsity that carries across all science at all places? Those sorts of questions don't rivet so much either the history or philosophy of science, and haven't for some time. So, but film about science has been far behind those sorts of thoughts, this new sort of way of looking at the world. So in my films, one of the things that it took me a long time to figure out what it would be like to have a film on science that was more focused on process and less focused on what's often called the popular understanding of science. I have nothing against the popular understanding of science.
No,
It's
no,
great, but
yeah.
that's not my value added to this. I mean, I was trying to show how science works, what it's like to be in the midst.
Yeah, to follow that thread, I want to return to the making of the image itself, but I'd like to continue that thread because I mean, one of the areas that I'll be selfish here. One of the areas that I've been interested in is the idea of science communication and public education during the Cold War, for example, the post-war era, and again coming out of a very large, collaborative, intensive physics project that resulted in imperilment of all existence on the face of the earth, known as the Manhattan Project. And again, Einstein leads into this in very direct ways. But also, during that time, you had the Eames office and the Powers of 10, plus their information installation for the IBM Pavilion at the New York World's Fair, up through Carl Sagan's Cosmos, etc., and into the Voyager project and the Golden Record, which your colleague Alex Redding has written about quite nicely. How do you position your documentary films then? Are they explorations of scientific problems, process, collaboration, labor, knowledge production? Do they fit at all into this, what I think is a somewhat dormant element of the post-war legacy in the contemporary moment, which is a kind of not popular, but a more public discussion about scientific production and education?
Well, there's a lot in your question. I mean, I do think that the position of the sciences has changed. I mean, Newton and Darwin in their times in the 17th and 19th centuries did have huge cultural impact and discussion much more widely and far, the idea of Newtonian law through Locke and others became part of the background to the forming of the documents that ground the United States. There's Darwin in good and bad ways have been, changed biology, but also social Darwinism and eugenics and all sorts of splinters there. So it's not as if the imbrication of science and society is new, But
Yeah.
there's something about what happens in the post-war period where, for instance, universities had typically subordinated the sciences to
Yes.
classics, and the classics were a form of the ascension of an upper class, first in theological terms and then later in more secular ones. And it's only really after World War II that you begin to see the sciences take something of a co-equal place at Oxbridge in Britain, or in the United States, in many universities, in Germany, the creation of the research seminar, the joining of teaching and research. These are all things in the mirror are closer than they seem, as it says on
Very,
the side
very
of your car.
recent.
So the research university is a last third of the 19th century creation. The co-equal status of the sciences is really a post-World War II creation. The
Yeah.
idea of the university is something that 30, 40, 50% of the population will follow, is very recent, and in Britain even more recent than the United States. So there's something that's changing about the place of science in the world. And I think that the depiction, the impact of the Cold War on all of culture after World
Yes.
War II is huge. I mean,
No.
we know from many studies about the art world and how it was, abstract expressionism and the spread through, as part of the
Well,
sort of Pax Americana
yes.
around the world. We know science teaching got reoriented towards the kind of subjects that were very much in demand in weapons production and the establishment. Not just that, it wasn't like, it's not that everybody that studied particle physics was working on weapons. They weren't at all. But
No.
the students who came up through these large numbers were part of a vast expansion of the peacetime militarization of Western Europe and NATO, and Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. I mean, it was a change. So yes, I think the Cold War had a huge effect, and bringing science to a broader audience was part and parcel of that. I think that what my goal in the filmmaking I've done has been, does want to address a larger audience than you achieve with a book or
Right.
an article. But I very strongly believe that addressing a larger audience means reducing the amount of specialized jargon, but not insulting people's intelligence. I tend to think people are very smart.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of people are very smart, and they want to understand ideas, and they can grapple with them, whether it's relativity or other things in biology, not my area. But I think you have to make things, I think you can keep the integrity of inquiry, and instead of simplifying ideas, strip out the kind of jargon that's repellent to people and that makes them feel like they're outsiders.
Yeah, that it's exclusory. And clearly, I think the point that you were making about the kind of global R&D university and post World War II and during the Cold War is very much, an invention of the GI Bill, the expansion of that population, but also, as you were talking about, say, the establishment of University of California, Berkeley, or Johns Hopkins, in which the centrality of technology as an important part of the building of a university, modeled on the University of Berlin quite clearly, begins to be something that shapes the post-war imaginary of what higher education could be, and it's Vannevar Bush kind of pushing that agenda, and it becomes not just the military-industrial complex, but the military-industrial entertainment university complex, all of it in a very large nexus, which links up with your big science project, but we don't necessarily need to go there. I'd like to loop back to the image of M87. It is, after all, 55 million light years away. Could you just talk about that as a problem, and then I want to talk about the image itself and its positioning and kind of how it was made.
Well, there are two black holes that are big on the sky, And
Yeah.
they're roughly the same size, the way the sun and the moon look like they're the same size. When in an eclipse, the moon fits nicely over the sun, which is lucky for us for many reasons. But the moon is much smaller than the sun. It's just a lot closer. So there's
Yeah.
one of these black holes, which is bright enough and big enough on the sky to have been imaginable to image. And that's at the center of our galaxy, the Milky Way. And it's called Sagittarius A, or Sagittarius A star, to indicate that's the
Mhm.
active nucleus of our galaxy that is the black hole. And then there's M87 star, this one that's 1,500 times farther away in the center of another very big galaxy called M87. And so those were the targets of this. But I say big on the sky, they're pretty small. It's like having a telescope that could read could watch you click the numbers on your cell phone on the moon from the Earth. I mean, it's really
Yeah.
tiny. So that's why you need a telescope the size of the Earth, which we synthesize by many telescopes. But when you do that, there are holes in the image. The image isn't complete. And
Right.
so we have to be able to, it's noisy and we have to use a lot of computation to
Yes.
fill out the hole, which is what your cell phone does when you take a picture with your
Absolutely.
cell phone. There's a
Yep.
massive amount of computation that compensates for a tiny little lens that
Yep.
costs practically nothing that's in the back of your camera. So the idea of a computer-aided image is part of it. It's in the infrared or close to the infrared, but we're also used to photography having infrared images. You've seen many
Absolutely.
of them, and you buy night vision glasses and you
Night vision. Yep.
see a coyote or a squirrel or fox outside in the dark. You're taking infrared images and making them into visible light, and so the project also has to do that. So it's a complicated process involving a lot of high technology, a supercomputer, the rotation of the Earth, the distribution
Yep.
of these telescopes, in order to recover this image. And when we first had the image about 9-10 months before we released it. It was released on April 10th, 2019. And that almost year was just trying to think of every which way we might have made a mistake. Could we be looking at an artifact? Could we be
Right.
seeing what we hoped to see rather than what was really there? So it was a very intense period of work for a group that by then was about 200 people strong.
Yeah, it's really great. And the image that comes out of it, is this construction of the relevant spectral signature into a plausible image, which looks a little bit like an eye pupil nestled into an inflamed corona surrounded by a black sclera. I mean, it kind of reminded me of my early days looking into a microscope. I generally just saw my eye back.
Well, we definitely hoped we weren't just seeing what we expected. That was the nightmare that haunted us for the whole for many years. Was we wanted to make sure that we weren't stopping or seizing upon an image that corresponded to what we wanted to see, but which might not be there.
But it was, I mean, it is interesting that it required you converting the Earth's surface into a camera.
Mm-hmm.
My friend Ben Bratton once said, and you had to use tools that mold and bundle and interpret data into interpretations such as chirp. But you also went through a process of dividing image interpretation into different groups and had them work separately, so that what they came up with was this kind of where the Venn diagram was of different ways of interpreting this data. And it really captured the public imagination, went worldwide, and it's now in MoMA, and takes a particular place with scientific imaging as and in relation to art that exists within MoMA. So I think in terms of trying to create that kind of a plausible image, no matter what image you make, it's going to it's always going to rely on some kind of material base, and the indexicality is always going to be an interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, I think indexicality is never just indexicality. It's always,
Absolutely not.
but yes, I mean, we did want to, we were captivated by this image and haunted by it. I mean, just staring at it for hours after we first got it. I think even the hard-boiled among all of us just were stunned to be looking at it. And even if we'd made simulation images in the past, suddenly to look at it and say, there is a black hole.
Right.
That we are looking at the black hole. And there was something thrilling about it, just stunning. And even now that picture I find very moving. And I've collaborated in various ways with MoMA and various projects that they've done. And I was there visiting some of my curator friends, and I showed them this picture, a small copy of it. And they said, oh, we have to have this for the
of course,
photographic collection. So we made up, my son, who's an artist and does a lot of photography, printed it up in large format. And we had even the color when we were first making the image. We don't see in the infrared.
No,
I mean, so we had to choose a color to represent it. Now the light and dark, brightness and less bright, that's given to us in this indexical sort of way. It's proportional to the data, and it's an elaborate process to make that so. But we could have printed it in black and white or in purple or blue. And we had a big discussion about this. I know I wanted it to be an orange, and people said, well, why? Blue is the hotter color. Photons have more energy in the blue than in the red or orange. And I said, yeah, but if you buy a refrigerator, it doesn't have a picture of it's blue, right? That's insignia. If you buy a stove, the warning don't touch is in red or orange. And and then we found this particular color format, which I thought was great. And but that was very much something we had to discuss.
Of course.
And now it's of course it's now so much apart. We kept the same color scheme when we made the first image of Sagittarius A star.
So has that project started?
The Sagittarius A star? Yeah, we published that image in May of 2022.
Okay.
And now what I'm super excited about is we're working on a project to capture pure light as it goes around the black hole. So it's if you could see inside that hot billion-degree plasma, the gas that's around the black hole in those images, there's a very thin ring. It's actually a sequence of very thin rings called the photon ring. And the project now was to introduce a new radio telescope 20,000 miles from the Earth's surface in space, which would join with the other telescopes and be able to capture that photon ring. If we could do that, we'd be seeing really the geometry of space and time itself, because the photons carve out the straightest lines in space-time. So you'd be seeing kind of the texture of the space-time through that image. So that's probably a 10-year project that we've embarked on, which feels kind of optimistic at this crazy moment in history. But I like the idea of saying, okay, we're going to do this, and in 10 years we're going to find that image. No,
that sounds great. So is that the project that you kind of proleptically gestured to at the beginning?
Yes.
That's terrific. I'd love to hear more. But I don't want to take up too much of the Q&A time. So I think if it's all right with you, we'll shift to that.
Yes.
We'll have some Q's, and hope you have some A's, and we'll go from there. Okay, so here's one. My colleague and friend Kendrick Oliver, did the concept of a cyclical universe offer a kind of precedent for thinking about black holes and information loss? I suppose also the idea of an accelerating universal expansion evokes the prospect of a broader information loss in a big rip or big crunch. Is this something you have explored? I mean, certainly the big crunch operates in the Kentridge thing as well, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt that I think that the culture and science within it has been concerned about the destruction of all things, the end of time, so to speak, in various ways. One of them was this terrifying thought for the 19th century that since entropy or disorder always increases, that as the universe, as energy was diffused in the world, that eventually it was called the heat death of the universe, and that would be the end of all things. And yes, in maximum entropy, you would have minimum information. That information, in that sense, that's a kind of a formulation. And the collapse is similarly would destroy things. And then there are people that have advocated for a cyclic universe that expands and contracts over and over again. There are many ways in which the fate of the universe, the fate of all things, has been a pervasive through line of thought, both cultural and scientific, for a very long time.
Yeah, that whole loss of energy and the energy death of the universe, the entropic death of the universe, is very much at play in the Kentridge piece, which very much about entropy and anti-entropy, or what Bernard Stiegler would call negentropy, things we can do to slow down the entropic processes, both literal and figurative, that exist around us. And in the installation, the metronomes really, the mechanical metronomes really capture that. Like, do you know Ligeti's piece, Poème Symphonique, which is 100 metronomes you put on a stage, wind down, and as they do, they decrease their speed at different rates. It becomes really quite heartbreaking when you get a few just kind of popping off now and again. So, I mean, this loops back again and again into numerous artistic forms and art projects. And in a way, I would argue any artwork is temporal. A painting has a time. Sculpture has a time.
Certainly, the idea of the clock as being simultaneously identified with us, with the heart. I mean, we are clocks, biological clocks, and mechanical clocks or electrical clocks very easily come to stand in for us for personhood. And Kentridge, certainly his metronomes are often personified very strongly. They stand for that click of the heart, and then they stop. There's kind of heart stopping. So, I think every generation has its own relationship to clock time. I mean, in a way, Einstein introduces this idea of a light clock of two mirrors with light going back and forth and ticking off that way. And through looking at that, he finds a particularly simple, clear way of explaining why time is different for different moving observers. And Galileo, as I said, used his heart as a clock. So, and black holes are their own kind of strange clock. I mean, so I think these themes of life and death and mortality, as mentioned before, the memento mori. I mean, these things are deeply suffused in physics. It's Einstein's change of our concept of time that was most radical. The rest of special relativity was really a carryover from earlier work by Poincaré and Lorentz. But the reformation of the idea of time and its full radical implication was shocking then and shocking even to people now. I mean, it's a big change.
Yeah, it is a huge change, and it does really constitute that shift into the 20th century in a profound way. There's another question that it says, Elizabeth Kessler wrote about the astronomical sublime in relation to the HST. With all the ideas that are attached to black holes and time, how does the sublime in general fit in with all of this?
Well, first I should say I like Elizabeth Kessler's book a lot, and she works with us. We have a working group called History, Philosophy, Culture as part of the next generation of work on the Event Horizon Telescope, and she's joined one of the focus groups that we have there on astronomical imaging. So shout out to her. Yes, I think that there are different kinds of sublime that people have talked about, and the technological sublime and the sort of Leo Marx's Machine in the Garden,
Yes.
that moment of outside Walden Pond of a locomotive plowing on the tracks through the woods. That combination of the natural and the unnatural, or the natural and the artificial, is grabs us. The relationship of scale, of our smallness to the mountains around us, but all the more so towards the astronomical. And I think that's what the astronomical sublime designates. That you could see something, and this is the factory or the birthplace of stars, or this is and the black hole, I think, participates in that kind
Yes.
of this idea that when you look at that picture of the black hole, you're looking at something that's bigger than our solar system, and it's a hole in space and time. I mean, it's amazing. Every galaxy, the 100 billion galaxies out there that we expect in the visible universe, each has a supermassive black hole at its heart, at its core. It's amazing.
It is, and that the photons from the luminous gas circling the the black hole took 55 million light years to get here. And
Yeah, I mean, when the image that we made of a black hole, those photons left M87 not long after the last dinosaur laid down its head.
Right.
And that's amazing. So in terms of time, distance, scale, size, but the effects of this, black holes are the darkest objects, but they're also the most luminous ones, because when they're spinning, they can create these vortices of magnetic fields that shoot out hot gases called jets. And these jets can cover distances bigger than galaxies. They're the biggest, most luminous objects around. And so that's part of what black holes are. They're these objects of infinite paradoxes. They're the darkest and the brightest. They're the simplest and the most complex. They have the least information and the most. And I think that's partly what makes them draw so many different fields of inquiry towards them.
Yeah, and the sublime there, I mean, in thinking about the black hole and the imaging project, links back to, I mean, when travelers would go out into nature in the latter part of the 19th century, they would take with them they'd take it out of their pocket, this little portable mechanical origami frame, in order to create a kind of gestalt of nature to contain the sublime and keep it at bay in a way, to kind of experience it, but also experience it at a distance, which we now do with these things, right? So it's another means of enframing our sense of self and refusing that time, as it were. So, all right. Well, I think we're coming up to close to the top of the hour. Is there anything else you'd like to mention in relation to the Black Hole Initiative? Because it sounds like the 10-year project is a big one and a good one, and one that we'll all be keen to follow and read about, and maybe see another movie about. I don't know.
I think that I would say black holes, like science, needs to be thought of as part of the culture we live in, not as something that sits outside of it. It both draws in the way we think of images, the way we think of philosophy, the way we think of big issues like our mortality, where do we come from and where are we headed? And they drive a lot of how the science unfolds. And then as the science does develop, it feeds back and gives us metaphors to think with, and ideas with which to understand our own position in the world.
And to make science fiction novels and films like Tarkovsky's The Stalker. But anyway, well, thanks a lot, Peter. We really appreciate your time and your work and your thought. It's been a great pleasure for me to spend this hour with you and have a conversation with you.
Thank you, and thank you to the audience for their good questions.
Thanks a lot. Take good care of yourself, and speak soon.
Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.